Hello, welcome to the next session on tithing. My name is Carsten Villa. I am the author of Tithing, Reviewing Scripture in Context. In our first session, we dealt with what the tithe was. The tithe was either in the form of war spoils, or that's pre-law, or in the Mosaic Law, it could only be given in food sources, either from harvest or from flocks. In session 2, we learned about Abraham and the tithe. We learned that Abraham tithed not from his own possessions, but he tithed from the war spoils belonging to the king of Sodom. And then in session 3, we learned about Jacob and the tithe, and we found out that Jacob vowed to tithe, but there is no evidence that he fulfilled the promise of that tithe. And quite apart from the fact he had no one to actually tithe to, because Laban, his uncle, was an idolater and he wasn't anywhere near Isaac. But the thing is, we've got no evidence that they were actually tithing during that time anyway. Quite apart from the fact, Jacob's lineage was in fact the tribe of Levi. One of his 12 sons was Levi, which the Aaronic priesthood would spring up from, and they were still in his loins. So that is the tithing issue on the pre-law. Now, this session we're going to be dealing with the law, and we're going to discuss eternal moral principles briefly, and which we really dealt with a lot during the pre-law sessions that I taught for 1, 2, and 3. If this was actually an eternal moral principle, then we would actually see evidence of the children of Israel tithing in the desert, which we didn't, but more onto that later on. In replacement theology, pastors and teachers or people running ministries like to put themselves in the position of the children of Israel, in that they say, well, tithing is a pre-law period in eternal moral principles, so therefore we should receive the tithe, or it's a part of the Mosaic tithe that they would like to resurrect. Now, if we look at the tribe of Levi, the Aaronic priesthood, the Mosaic Law, which is what this session is actually about, then we need to talk about Aaron. So Aaron, if we see in Numbers 18:1, then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons and your father's house with you shall bear the iniquity related to the sanctuary, and you and your sons with you shall bear the iniquity associated with your priesthood." In other words, the Aaronic priesthood and the tribe of Levi were there for the sole purpose of being priests to Israel. But you've got to remember that not every Levite was a priest. Only some of the Levites were actually priests. The rest of the Levites were part of the Levitical tribe, but they acted as temple workers and they helped the priests officiate at the altar. And the Levites collected all the tithe. That was 10% from all of Israel, and from that 10%, the priests would have 1% of the 10%, so effectively a tenth of a tenth. Now, the priests had to eat their portion in the temple area because it was holy to the Lord and could not leave the temple area. Only the priest could directly worship God. If the other Levites would have tried, they would have died due to the holiness of God. However, the Levites themselves, the temple workers, were allowed to take their portion of the tithe and eat their portion of the tithe with their families or in any of the Levitical cities. Now, the recurring theme in the book of Leviticus, and specifically with the law, we're dealing with Leviticus 27, 28 to 34. Not the most exciting reading. It's good for bedtime reading because quite often it can just send you straight to sleep. But Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy are not usually on the favourite reading list for inspiration. But I tell you what, as far as the tithe is concerned, very, very useful indeed. So Leviticus 27, 28 to 34, I'm going to pull out the main verse here. "And all the tithe of the land, whether the seed of the land or the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord." And the words "holy to the Lord" is a recurring theme that you're going to hear again and again. Now, the interesting thing is, what was also holy to the Lord were the offerings, the consecration, the atonement, religious festivals, food laws, redemption laws, devoted things, and lastly, also tithing. Now, the interesting thing is that we only choose to take the tithing aspect out of the law, but we decide to leave everything else behind because we're not really interested in the animal offerings, the consecration, the atonement, the religious festivals, food laws, redemption laws, and devoted things, or Sabbath keeping or circumcision. But what we tend to do is we take out the tithing and say, yes, that must apply to us because that's quite useful in the form of money. But of course here, the only time that tithing took place was only ever in food. Now, the Apostle Paul makes it very, very clear that if we are trying to follow the law, we've got to follow all the law, not just little bits of it. Galatians 3:10-11 says, "For as many are of the works of the law are under the curse, for it is written, Cursed is everyone who does not continue in all these things which are written in the book of the law to do them. But that no one justified by the law in the sight of God is evident, for the just shall live by faith." In other words, we are completely supposed to live by faith, and we're not bound by aspects of the law. If you follow one aspect of the law, in other words tithing, you have to follow all of it. Now, as I mentioned earlier that I would discuss eternal moral principles quickly, if tithing was an eternal moral principle, then really in the book of Numbers, then we would clearly see that the Jews would have been tithing actually in the desert, but they weren't, because they didn't own land, they weren't planting crops, manna was falling from heaven. Now they could have easily tithed from the riches that they got from Egypt when they left, but that was not a requirement. Why? Because tithing always happened in the form of food sources, and the first time that we actually see tithing in operation is when they actually got to the Holy Land. Now, the Holy Land is the only place that you are allowed to tithe in, and only food sources from the Holy Land were accepted in the form of tithe. If you were a Jew living outside of Israel, you were not allowed to tithe. Furthermore, if you were an alien and you joined the Jewish people later on inside Israel, you were also not allowed to tithe. So, tithing could only take place from the supernatural increase from the land of Israel. And here's the really big hard hitter. Tithing would cease after every 7 years. So every 7th year, the land would rest for the purpose of crop rotation, and no tithing would take place. Now, if tithing is applicable to us today, then that law should also take place that we shouldn't tithe on the 7th year. Yet, no one has ever heard that in any church before. To add to that, of course, you have the 50th Jubilee year. No one could tithe on the 50th Jubilee year either. Now, the evidence for not tithing on the 7th year or the 50th year is in Exodus 23:11 and Leviticus 25:12-13. This ends our session 4. Next session, we will be dealing with how many tithes there actually were, and we will briefly revisit the law again. My name is Carsten Villa. I'm the author of Tithing, Reviewing Scripture and Context. You can find the link to the book in the description. Please like, share, and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thank you very much.